Hey everyone, tonight we're uncovering history's greatest cover-up, how the church systematically transformed healing women into devil-worshipping witches, erasing thousands of years of female spiritual power through the most successful propaganda campaign ever waged. Before we begin, hit like if you're ready to discover why 9 million women had to die for Christianity to claim dominion over the divine. And let me know in the comments if you've ever wondered why wise woman became synonymous with evil. Now dim those lights and settle in. We're about to explore how priestesses became witches, how healers became heretics, and why the sacred feminine had to be burned at the stake for patriarchy to claim total victory. Without further ado, let's begin. The temple walls still remember her voice. In the sacred darkness of Çatalhöyük, 9,000 years before Christ walked the earth, she sits cross-legged before the altar. Her hands, stained with ochre and clay, shape the curve of breast and hip. The goddess takes form beneath her fingers, not the meek virgin that later ages will demand, but the fierce mother who births worlds and devours them whole. She is priestess. She is oracle. She is the voice through which divinity speaks. The smoke of burning herbs spirals upward, carrying prayers older than written words. Around her, the walls pulse with painted hands, red palms pressed into wet plaster by women who knew their touch was sacred, their bodies temples, their wisdom the bridge between earth and sky. This is before the burning. This is before the fear. This is when women stood closest to the divine, and no one questioned their right to be there. In ancient Sumer, where the first cities rise like prayers from the Mesopotamian mud, Inanna descends into the underworld. But she is no victim in this tale. She goes willingly, crowned with the horns of heaven, her body draped in the me, the sacred powers that govern existence itself. The high priestess who speaks her words stands atop the great ziggurat of Uruk, her voice carrying across the city like thunder. Below, thousands prostrate themselves, not before a distant god in a locked temple, but before a woman whose body channels divine fury and divine love in equal measure. She owns the temple estates. She controls the grain stores. She decides which marriages are blessed, which contracts honored, which kings rule with heaven's favor. When she speaks, armies march. When she is silent, crops wither. Her power is not borrowed from men. It flows through her like river water through carved channels, ancient and unstoppable. In her hands, the sacred marriage rite unfolds each year. The king comes to her chamber not as master, but as supplicant, his crown heavy with the understanding that without her blessing, his rule means nothing. She is the land itself, fertile and terrible, and he merely the seed that hopes to take root. The Nile floods, and in the mud-brick temples of ancient Egypt, another priestess wakes to the sound of sistrum bells. She is God's wife of Amun, and her morning ritual commands the attention of pharaohs. Her titles stretch like hieroglyphs across temple walls. Divine adoratress, God's hand, she who appeases the god with her voice. But these are more than pretty words carved in stone. They represent power that makes kings tremble. She owns 1/3 of Egypt's agricultural land. Her signature on papyrus can bankrupt provinces or enrich them. When she dies, her funeral procession stretches for miles, and the mourning lasts for months. But watch her in the Holy of Holies, when the doors swing shut and the world falls away. Here, she is not administrator or landowner, but something far older. Her hands move in gestures learned from her mother's mother's mother, back through an unbroken line to the first woman who ever spoke to gods. She breathes on the sacred fire, and it flares. She whispers the secret names that keep Ma'at's feather balanced, that hold chaos at bay for another day. Without her voice, the sun might forget to rise. Without her touch, the Nile might refuse to flood. This is not superstition, this is power. On the windswept Isle of Crete, the snake goddess raises her arms, and serpents coil around her wrists like living jewelry. Her bare breasts catch the Mediterranean light streaming through palace windows, and her flounced skirts whisper against marble floors worn smooth by dancing feet. She is not carved in stone. She lives, breathes, rules. In her palace at Knossos, women move through corridors painted with dolphins and flowers, their voices echoing in chambers designed for feminine laughter. Here, the throne belongs to queens, and bulls leap not for the glory of gods, but for the pleasure of goddesses who understand that power can be beautiful, terrible, and wild all at once. Her priestesses tend the sacred snakes in underground chambers, their hands fearless as they lift creatures that could kill with a single bite. The serpents know their touch, recognize the authority that flows through female fingers like electric current. When the earth shakes, and it shakes often in these volcanic islands, she does not cower. She spreads her arms wider, calling to the goddess who dwells beneath the earth, woman speaking to woman across the veil between worlds. We are not afraid, her gesture says. We are not small. We are daughters of the First Mother, and we remember how to speak with storms. The Pythia breathes the vapors rising from the sacred chasm, and Apollo's voice pours through her like molten gold. But it is her larynx that shapes the words, her lungs that give them breath, her body that trembles with divine possession. Kings cross oceans to kneel before her. Armies halt their march to hear her prophecy. Cities rise or fall on the strength of sentences that leave her lips stained with sacred frenzy. She sits on the tripod chair, her eyes rolled back, her voice no longer her own. Around her, the Temple of Delphi gleams with offerings from every corner of the known world. Gold from Lydia, silver from Spain, ivory from Africa. All of it tribute to the power that speaks through a woman's throat. But when the god departs and the vapors fade, she returns to herself. She bathes in the Castalian spring, the sacred water washing away the residue of divinity. She eats bread and olives, drinks wine that tastes of mountain herbs. She is human again, mortal again. But the memory of godhood lingers in her bones, the knowledge that she has been chosen, that her voice carries weight enough to topple empires. This is her birthright. This is her inheritance, not from father or husband, but from the long line of women who have always known how to listen when gods speak, how to translate divine will into human words. In the oak groves of Gaul, Brigid's flame burns eternal. The Celtic priestess tends it with hands that have never known the weight of wedding rings, never bent to any master save the goddess herself. She is druid, bard, metalworker, healer. The sacred fire that dances before her altar burns with the memory of stars, the first light that broke the darkness when the world was young. 20 women guard this flame in shifts, ensuring it never dies, never falters. For if Brigid's fire goes out, the seasons will forget their turning. The forge will grow cold. The words of power will crumble on poets' tongues. She moves through the forest like she owns it, because she does. Every tree recognizes her authority. Every stream sings her name. When she speaks, ravens gather to listen. When she walks, the very earth seems to pulse beneath her feet. Her knowledge flows deeper than roots, older than stone. She knows which herbs heal and which kill, which metals sing in the forge fire, which words can bind a soul or set it free. Warriors come to her for blessings before battle. Mothers bring sick children to touch the hem of her robes. Poets kneel for inspiration, and she breathes it into them like sacred smoke. This is the world before the cross cast its shadow across Europe. This is the time when female divinity needed no explanation, no defense, no justification. This is when women held the keys to mystery, and everyone understood that some doors can only be opened by feminine hands. But watch the shadows lengthening at the grove's edge. Listen for the sound of sandaled feet on Roman roads, of horses carrying new gods to old lands. The priestess tends her fire, unaware that other flames are already being lit. Flames that will burn hotter than her sacred hearth. Flames that will consume not just temples, but the memory of what women once were. She braids flowers into her hair and sings the old songs, not knowing they are being sung for the last time. The fire burns. The goddess speaks. the world turns on its ancient axis. For now. But change is coming, riding on the wind, like the scent of smoke from distant pyres. New voices are rising, male voices, claiming exclusive communion with a jealous God who has no patience for rival divinities, no tolerance for women who refuse to bow their heads and still their tongues. The sacred feminine stands at the crossroads of history, magnificent and vulnerable, ancient and about to be reborn as something monstrous. She does not know it yet. She tends the flame and listens for the goddess's voice, unaware that soon, very soon, that same voice will be called demonic, her knowledge transformed into evil, her power twisted into something the world must fear. But for this moment, this golden, terrible moment, she is still what she was always meant to be. Holy, powerful, divine, the last priestess before the first witch. The fire burns, the goddess speaks, and somewhere in the darkness, men sharpen knives and prepare to teach women the price of standing too close to the light. The goddess retreats to smaller temples now. Her altars grow humble, hidden in cottage gardens and forest clearings, where foxglove nods beside feverfew, where women still remember the old names whispered in their mothers' tongues. She is no longer crowned with gold or housed in marble halls, but she persists. In the villages of medieval Europe, where church bells toll over thatched roofs and narrow lanes wound between timber and clay walls, she wears a different face. The villagers call her wise woman, herb wife, midwife. The church calls her something else entirely, but not yet, not quite yet, do they dare speak the word that will doom her. Watch her move through the morning mist, her woolen cloak damp with dew, her leather satchel heavy with gathered treasures. She knows which mushrooms sprout after rain, which bark strips clean from willow when the moon is dark, which flowers yield their secrets to patient hands. The village women wait for her. They always wait for her. Margot clutches her swollen belly, her face grey with the effort of breathing. The baby sits wrong inside her, sideways, stubborn, refusing the call of birth. The men stand helpless in the doorway, their prayers as useless as their strong backs when faced with the mysteries of the womb. But she knows, she has always known. Her hands find the tight mound of flesh, fingertips reading the story written in muscle and bone. The baby sleeps deep, content in its warm darkness, unaware that its position courts death for both mother and child. "Breathe," she murmurs, her voice carrying the weight of countless births, countless midnight vigils beside bloodied straw. "Breathe and trust." Her hands work with practiced skill, pressing and turning, coaxing the child to dance within its liquid chamber. Ancient knowledge flows through her fingers, knowledge passed from woman to woman through unbroken chains of shared pain and triumph. She has delivered kings and beggars, watched life crown in screaming triumph and slip away in whispered sorrow. Her hands have caught thousands of souls as they tumbled from the darkness into light, slippery with birth waters and possibility. When the baby finally slides free, pink, perfect, furious with first breath, the mother weeps with relief. The father crosses himself and offers coins. But the wise woman knows her true payment comes from elsewhere, from the satisfaction of keeping death at bay for another day, from the privilege of witnessing the raw miracle that women's bodies can perform. This is her calling. This is her gift. This is why the church fears her. In the herb garden behind her cottage, she tends plants that hold the difference between life and death in their leaves and roots. Ergot rye helps women in difficult labor, loosening the womb's grip when the body refuses to release its burden. Willow bark soothes the fever that burns through children like wildfire. Foxglove steadies the racing heart that might otherwise burst from its cage of ribs. She knows the dangerous ones too. Monkshood that stops a heart in minutes, hemlock that brings sleep without waking, nightshade that opens doorways best left closed. This knowledge makes her powerful, and power in a woman's hands has always been a dangerous thing. Her apprentice watches from the garden's edge, a girl of 14 whose monthly bleeding has just begun. The wise woman sees the hunger in her eyes, the desperate need to understand the secrets that whisper in the wind through summer herbs. "Come," she says, gesturing toward a patch of white flowers nodding in the morning breeze. "Queen Anne's lace. But look closer." The girl kneels, studying the delicate umbels that dance like tiny parasols. They look innocent enough, pretty enough to weave into wedding crowns. See the purple flower at the center. The wise woman's finger hovers over the single dark bloom nestled among its white sisters. That's the queen's blood. Without it, you have poison hemlock instead. One saves a woman from unwanted pregnancy. The other kills her before sunset. The girl's eyes widen. Such knowledge could save her someday, could save her sisters, her daughters yet unborn. But it could also damn her if the wrong ears hear these whispered teachings. "Why do you tell me this?" the girl asks. The wise woman's smile carries the weight of centuries, the bitter understanding of women who have always walked the knife's edge between healer and heretic. "Because someone must remember," she says. "Because when they come for me, and they will come, you will carry the knowledge forward. Hidden in recipes for healing tisanes, disguised as innocent cooking herbs, woven into lullabies that sound like nonsense to men, but speak truth to women who know how to listen." In the village square, market day brings its usual chaos of bleating goats and shouting merchants. But beneath the surface noise, another kind of commerce flows. Women brush against each other at the well, their fingers briefly touching as they exchange more than pleasantries. A pinch of dried herbs changes hands, a whispered recipe for bringing on delayed bleeding. The name of a woman 2 villages over who can help when a husband's fists leave more than bruises. They speak in code, these village women. For the stomach complaint that comes monthly, for the fever that only certain women catch, for the baby that refuses to quicken. The wise woman moves among them like a spider at the center of her web, dispensing wisdom with the careful precision of someone who knows that knowledge can be twisted into evidence, healing transformed into harm with the stroke of a clerk's pen. Young Father Benedict watches from the church steps, his pale hands clutched around his wooden cross. He has heard the whispers, seen the surreptitious exchanges. In his mind, he catalogues each interaction, each furtive glance, building a case against practices that predate his church by centuries. He does not understand what he sees, and his ignorance makes him dangerous. When little Thomas falls into the fever that has claimed 3 children this summer, his mother does not go first to the church. She runs instead to the wise woman's cottage, her bare feet slipping on wet stones, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. The wise woman comes without hesitation, her satchel already packed with the herbs she knows will be needed. She finds the boy burning in his bed, his small body rigid with convulsions, his eyes rolled back to show only white. She works through the night, bathing his fevered skin with cool water infused with willow bark, forcing sips of meadowsweet tea between his cracked lips. Her hands never stop moving, checking his pulse, adjusting his covers, measuring the tiny doses that might save him, or might, if she misjudges, grant him a quieter death than the fever promises. As dawn breaks grey and cold through the cottage windows, the fever finally breaks. Thomas opens his eyes, looks at his mother with recognition, asks for water in a voice weak but wonderfully human. The mother weeps. The wise woman merely nods and packs her herbs away. But Father Benedict, arriving with his holy water and sacred oils, sees only a woman standing over a recovered child, and his mind leaps to conclusions that will echo through the coming centuries. "Witchcraft," he whispers to his superiors. "She made the child sick to demonstrate her power over sickness. She traffics with demons, bargains with forces of darkness." He does not say what he really fears, that her healing works when his prayers fail, that villagers trust her touch more than his blessing, that she wields a power he cannot understand or control. The wise woman sees the change in how people look at her now. Where once there was gratitude, now she catches glimpses of fear. Where once mothers brought their children freely, now they hesitate at her door, torn between need and newly planted doubt. She is still the same woman who delivered their babies, who saved their children from fever, who helped them through the dark times when men's medicine offered only bleeding and prayers. But whispers have power, and whispers change everything. Late at night, alone in her cottage with only the cats for company, she tends her garden by moonlight. The herbs grow regardless of what men think of her, their healing properties unchanged by theological debate. Comfrey still knits bone, valerian still brings sleep, and birthwort still eases the pains of labor. But for how much longer? She can feel the change coming like weather in her bones, can sense the gathering storm that will soon break over all women who dare to know too much, who refuse to limit their understanding to what priests approve. She picks sage by moonlight and whispers the old blessings, speaking to goddesses whose names are becoming dangerous to remember. The plants listen, their leaves silver in the ancient light, their secrets safe for now in the hands of a woman who understands that healing and heresy are separated by nothing more than the opinion of men who have never felt a child move in their belly or eased a soul's passage from life to death. The moon sets, the herbs wait, and in the village, a young priest sharpens his pen and begins to write letters that will travel all the way to Rome, carrying words that will soon become weapons. The witch is not born yet. She is still just a woman who knows which plants heal and which harm, who can coax life from death's very threshold, who remembers the old ways in a world determined to forget them. But the word is coming, the accusation that will transform healer into heretic, midwife into monster. Soon, very soon, her knowledge will become her crime, her gift, her death sentence. The herbs remember, the women remember, and somewhere in the darkness, the first match strikes, lighting the fires that will burn for centuries to come. The cross casts a longer shadow now. In the candlelit chambers of monasteries and cathedral schools, men in rough brown robes bend over parchment, their quills scratching out the future with black ink. They write new laws, new interpretations, new ways of seeing the world that leave no room for goddesses or the women who serve them. The year is 364, and in the city of Laodicea, bishops gather like ravens around Carrion. Their voices echo off stone walls as they debate the question that will reshape the world. What place should women hold in God's kingdom? The answer comes swift and sharp as a blade. Let no woman speak in the churches, they decree, their words heavy with finality. Let no woman teach. Let no woman hold authority over any man. The ink dries on parchment, but the words will live for centuries, growing like poison in the roots of every tree that dares to shelter female wisdom. They do not stop there. How could they? Once you begin to cage the divine feminine, you must lock every door, seal every window, leave no crack through which her light might seep. Let no woman perform the sacred mysteries, they continue. Let no woman approach the altar except to clean it. Let no woman's voice rise in prayer, save to beg forgiveness for the sin of her very existence. In distant villages, the wise women do not yet know their doom has been written. They tend their herbs, deliver their babies, ease their neighbor's pain, unaware that their healing hands are being reborn in bishops' minds as claws, their life-giving knowledge transformed into demonic sorcery. But the church knows. Oh, the church knows exactly what it does. Bishop Cyril of Alexandria stands in his cathedral, his arms spread wide as he preaches to the assembled crowd. His voice booms off marble pillars, stolen from pagan temples, his words falling like hammer blows on souls already bent beneath the weight of new doctrine. The old gods are demons, he thunders. The old ways are snares of Satan. Those who cling to the worship of false goddesses embrace damnation. In the crowd, old women clutch their hidden amulets, little clay figures of Isis, worn smooth by generations of faithful fingers. They remember when this very cathedral was a temple to the goddess, when their grandmothers danced here beneath stars and spoke with divine voices that needed no male interpretation. But memory is dangerous now. Memory is heresy. The bishop's eyes find them in the crowd, these women who refuse to forget. His lips curve in a smile that holds no warmth. "Bring forth the sacred books," he commands. They drag the bundles into the cathedral square, scrolls of papyrus and sheets of parchment, some so old they crumble at a touch. The accumulated wisdom of centuries, healing formulae, star charts, songs to ease childbirth, prayers to goddesses whose names are older than Rome itself. The flames rise hungry and bright. Each scroll that burns takes with it the voice of some long-dead priestess, some grandmother's carefully preserved recipe for easing fever or preventing pregnancy. The smoke climbs toward heaven, carrying the cremated dreams of women who dared to think they could speak directly to the divine. Hypatia of Alexandria watches from her window as another pile of books feeds the ever-hungry fires. She is the last, perhaps, of the great female philosophers, her mind sharp enough to slice through the confused mathematics of Ptolemy, her lectures drawing students from across the known world. But she can feel the walls closing in. In the streets below, Christian mobs roam with increasing boldness, their voices raised in hymns that sound more like war chants. They carry stones and clubs, these soldiers of the new faith, and their eyes burn with the fervor of men who have been told that destroying the old world is their sacred duty. Her students, the young men who once hung on her every word, begin to stay away. Their parents whisper warnings about the danger of learning from a woman, especially one who refuses to bow her head before the new god's exclusive demands. She teaches anyway. She has to. Someone must remember that women once moved through the world unafraid, that female minds once grappled with the greatest questions of existence without asking permission from any priest. But when the mob comes for her, dragging her from her lecture hall into the harsh sunlight of a Jerusalem morning, she understands that she is not just dying for her refusal to convert. She is dying for the crime of being a woman who thinks, who teaches, who refuses to disappear quietly into the shadows, where the new faith demands all her sisters go. They scrape her flesh from her bones with oyster shells, these good Christian men, and each stroke of their makeshift blades erases another voice, another possibility, another thread in the tapestry of female wisdom that will take centuries to reweave. Miles away in the green hills of Ireland, the transformation takes a different form. Here, the old religion does not die. It shapeshifts, wearing Christian robes while keeping its pagan heart. Brigid tends her sacred flame as she has for centuries, but now the priests call her Saint Brigid, insist her fire burns for the glory of their God instead of her own divine nature. They allow her 19 sister priestesses to continue their vigil, but only because they claim the women serve the Christian saint, not the ancient goddess. The flame burns the same, the prayers have the same power, but the meaning changes, and meaning is everything. The young nun who tends the fire does not fully understand what has been lost, what has been stolen in this careful alchemy of transformation. She speaks her devotions to Saint Brigid, unaware that she prays to a goddess whose true name has been painted over like a mural covered in whitewash. But sometimes, in the deep hours of night when the flame dances highest, she feels something ancient stir in her bones. The fire speaks to her in a language older than Latin, older than the written word. For just a moment, she remembers what it felt like when women's voices rose unashamed to call on divine power that flowed through female forms. Then morning comes, and the memory fades, and she goes back to believing what the priests have taught her, that women must humble themselves, must serve, must never again claim direct communion with the sacred. Across the Irish Sea, in the Saxon kingdoms of England, the work of transformation proceeds with methodical precision. King after king converts, not from spiritual conviction, but from political necessity. The old gods offer individual power, personal relationship with the divine. The new god offers something far more useful to ambitious men: institutional control, hierarchical order, the promise that heaven itself endorses their earthly dominion. The village shrines disappear one by one. Sometimes they burn. More often, they simply acquire new dedicatees. The healing spring sacred to the Celtic goddess Sulis becomes St. Brigid's Well overnight. The grove where women gathered to honor the Earth Mother becomes St. Mary's Chapel, built with stones torn from the goddess's ancient altar. But the power remains. Water still heals. Trees still whisper secrets. Women still know which herbs ease pain and which prevent unwanted pregnancy. The church cannot destroy the wisdom. It can only drive it underground, criminalize it, transform healers into heretics with nothing more than the stroke of a pen. In Rome, Pope Gregory the Great sits at his marble desk, dictating letters that will reshape the world. His scribes work frantically to keep pace with the flood of new decrees, new prohibitions, new ways of controlling the unruly flock that still remembers the old ways. To Bishop Augustine in Britain, he dictates, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You must be zealous in destroying the pagan temples, but preserve the buildings. Sprinkle them with holy water. Place altars and relics within them. If the people see their sacred places destroyed, they will resist. But if the places remain, while only the meaning changes, they will accept the transformation without rebellion. Clever, practical, devastating. 1,000 village shrines become Christian churches overnight. Their stones the same, but their purpose forever altered. The sacred groves where priestesses once performed the mysteries become the sites of monasteries where only men may approach the divine. The healing springs where women gathered become holy wells where only male priests may bless the waters. The goddess does not die. She fragments into 1,000 saints, her attributes scattered among acceptable female figures who maintain just enough of her old power to satisfy the people's spiritual hunger while posing no threat to male ecclesiastical authority. Isis becomes the Virgin Mary, but stripped of her role as Queen of Heaven, reduced to a vessel for someone else's divine child. Artemis becomes Saint Diana, but her wild independence is tamed into modest submission. Hecate becomes Saint Helen, but her mastery over life and death shrinks to quiet prayers for good weather. And the women who served them, they become nuns, their power channeled into acceptable forms of service. They may tend the sick, but only under male supervision. They may transcribe holy books, but only texts written by men. They may pray, but only for forgiveness, humility, the grace to disappear gracefully into the shadows of history. In the monastery of Monte Cassino, Brother Benedict writes his rule, the document that will govern monastic life for centuries to come. His pen scratches across parchment as he codifies the new relationship between sacred and secular, between men and women, between acceptable and forbidden forms of spiritual power. Let no woman enter the monastery grounds, he writes. Let no monk speak with any woman alone. Let no female voice disturb the sacred silence of places dedicated to God. But he knows what he really fears. Not women's weakness, but their strength. Not their distance from the divine, but their ancient intimacy with it. The rule he writes is not protection for his monks. It is protection from the terrible possibility that women might still remember how to call gods by their true names, might still know secrets that predated Christ by millennia. The transformation accelerates. In Francia, Merovingian queens lose their ancient rights to rule in their own names. In Visigothic Spain, the last priestesses are dragged from their temples and forced into Christian convents. In the Germanic tribes beyond the Rhine, sacred groves fall to Christian axes, their guardian priestesses scattered like leaves before winter wind. But the wise women persist. They adapt, survive, continue their ancient work under new names. The village healer becomes the good wife who knows herbs. The priestess becomes the cunning woman who can cure illness and find lost objects. The oracle becomes the wise woman who can read omens in bird flight and weather patterns. They cannot stop the knowledge from flowing, these priests and bishops and kings. Water finds its way around every obstruction, seeps through every barrier. The old wisdom survives in lullabies, in cooking recipes, in stories told by firelight to children who do not yet understand they are learning dangerous things. But the church learns too. It learns that total destruction breeds martyrs, inspires resistance. Better to corrupt than to destroy. Better to twist the old knowledge into new forms that serve ecclesiastical power rather than threaten it. And so, the stage is set for what comes next. The wise women practice their healing arts, unaware that each success, each recovery, each life saved builds evidence against them in the growing files of church investigators. They think they are hidden, protected by their usefulness to communities that need their skills. They do not understand that usefulness itself has become suspicious, that healing too well suggests supernatural assistance, that knowing too much about the human body marks a woman as dangerously close to forbidden knowledge. The word is coming, the accusation that will transform every village healer into a potential heretic, every midwife into a servant of Satan, every woman who refuses to limit her knowledge to what men approve into something that must be hunted, tried, and burned. The church has planted the seeds of its war against the sacred feminine. Soon, very soon, the harvest will begin. The year is 1484, and in the cold stone chambers of the Dominican monastery at Cologne, two monks bend over their manuscript like alchemists transmuting lead into gold. But their alchemy is far more sinister. They are transforming women into monsters with nothing more than ink and parchment. Heinrich Kramer dips his quill into the inkwell, his pale fingers stained black from months of fevered writing. Beside him, Jacob Sprenger nods approval as each sentence takes shape, each paragraph building a case against half of humanity that will stand for centuries. The Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, the book that will teach the world to see evil in every woman who knows too much, heals too well, or refuses to disappear quietly into the shadows where good Christian wives belong. Question the first, Kramer writes, his voice a whisper in the monastery's silence. Whether the belief that there are such beings as witches is so essential a part of the Catholic faith that obstinately to maintain the opposite opinion manifestly savors of heresy. The answer, of course, is yes. It must be yes. Because if witches do not exist, then the Church has no enemy to fight, no reason to demand absolute obedience from women who might otherwise remember their ancient power. But Kramer knows witches exist. He has seen them with his own eyes. In the village healing woman who saved a child when his prayers failed. In the midwife whose hands guide life into the world without invoking Christ's name. In the widow who lives alone and answers to no man's authority. These women terrify him, not because they traffic with demons, but because they prove that female power needs no male permission, no ecclesiastical approval, no blessing from Rome. So he invents the witch to destroy the wise woman. He crafts a monster to murder the healer. The manuscript grows beneath his hands like a malignant tumor, each chapter more poisonous than the last. Here, he explains why women are more susceptible to diabolic influence, their weaker minds, their insatiable carnal desires, their natural inclination toward deception. There, he details the signs of witchcraft, healing the sick, knowing the properties of herbs, living independently without male protection. Every page drips with misogyny disguised as theology, hatred masked as scholarship. All witchcraft comes from carnal lust, he writes, the words flowing like poison from his pen, which is in women insatiable. The monastery cat leaps onto his desk, and for a moment his hand trembles. Even the animals seem to sense the evil taking shape beneath his fingers. But he continues. He must continue. Too much depends on this work, the Church's authority, his own reputation, the dream of a world where women know their place and keep to it without question. Across the mountains in the Papal States, Pope Innocent VIII receives the manuscript with approval that borders on enthusiasm. Here, finally, is the tool he needs to complete the work begun centuries ago: the transformation of female wisdom into female wickedness, of healing into heresy, of independence into evil. His papal Bull Summis Desiderantes Effectibus spreads across Europe like wildfire, carrying official sanction for the hunting of witches. The words echo in cathedral squares and monastery halls, in courtrooms and torture chambers. It has indeed lately come to our ears that in some parts of northern Germany, many persons of both sexes, unmindful of their own salvation and straying from the Catholic faith, have abandoned themselves to devils, incubi and succubi, and by their incantations, spells, conjurations, and other accursed charms and crafts, enormities and horrid offences, have slain infants yet in the mother's womb, as also the offspring of cattle have blasted the produce of the earth, the grapes of the vine, the fruits of the trees. The language is careful, calculated. It does not speak of village healers or wise women. Instead, it conjures images of baby killers and crop destroyers, of women so thoroughly corrupted by evil that they have become enemies of life itself. But those who know how to read between the lines understand the truth. Every skill attributed to witches, knowledge of herbs, understanding of the human body, ability to ease pain or prevent pregnancy, belongs to the traditional healing women who have served their communities for generations. The witch hunt begins not in the dark forests of folklore, but in the precise legal language of ecclesiastical courts. In the German city of Würzburg, Prince Bishop Julius Echter receives his copy of the Malleus with hands that shake, not from fear, but from anticipation. He has been waiting for this moment, this official permission to do what he has long dreamed of doing. His territory is prosperous, peaceful, filled with villages where old women still brew healing teas and young ones learn the arts of midwifery from their mothers. Such knowledge represents a threat to his authority, a reminder that people turn to female wisdom long before they learn to kneel before male priests. But now he has the law on his side. Now he has the church's blessing to transform every wise woman into a servant of Satan, every healer into a heretic. He begins with Margarita, the midwife, whose skills have saved countless mothers and children. Her crime: she knows how to turn a breached baby in the womb, how to stop bleeding after childbirth, how to ease the agony of difficult labor. Such knowledge, the bishop declares, can only come from diabolic instruction. They drag her to the castle dungeon on a grey morning when mist clings to the river like the breath of ghosts. She is 63 years old, her hands gnarled from decades of service, her back bent from leaning over countless birthing beds. But in the Inquisitor's eyes, she is a monster in human form. The torture begins gently. A few weights attached to her feet, some pressure applied to her thumbs. The questions come in Latin, which she does not understand, translated by clerks who twist her answers into confessions of impossible crimes. "How do you turn a baby in the womb?" they ask. "I press here and here," she whispers, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own sobbing. "I learned from my mother, as she learned from hers." But the scribe writes. The accused admits to using supernatural powers to manipulate unborn children, knowledge she claims to have received from her mother, who was also a witch. Day after day, the questions continue. They want to know about her herbs, her remedies, her methods of easing pain. Each answer she gives becomes evidence of her guilt, each truth she tells proof of her diabolic alliance. When they ask about the herbs she uses to prevent pregnancy, she hesitates. This knowledge is dangerous, has always been dangerous. Women who can control their fertility threaten the natural order that demands they bear children until their bodies break or death claims them. But the thumbscrews tighten, and pain has a way of loosening tongues. "Queen Anne's lace," she gasps. "The seeds, taken after coupling. It prevents quickening." The inquisitors exchange glances. Here is the proof they need. A woman who knows how to thwart God's will. who understands secrets that allow females to escape their ordained suffering. "And who taught you this diabolic knowledge?" they press. "My mother," Margareta weeps. "Only my mother." Another name for their list, another woman to hunt. By the time they burn her, 3 weeks later, Margareta has confessed to flying through the air on a broomstick, attending Sabbaths where she worshipped the devil, casting spells that blighted crops and killed cattle. She has named 17 other women as her accomplices in evil, including her own daughter and the village's most respected herb woman. None of it is true. All of it is true. She never flew on a broomstick, but she did possess knowledge that let her soar above the limitations men placed on female understanding. She never worshipped Satan, but she did serve powers older than Christ. She never blighted crops, but she did preserve wisdom that threatened to grow beyond ecclesiastical control. The fire consumes her body, but her confessions live on, written in careful script in the Inquisitor's ledgers. Each name she gave under torture becomes a new target. Each skill she described becomes a new sign of witchcraft. The epidemic spreads. In village after village, the pattern repeats with mechanical precision. The wise woman is arrested, tortured until she confesses, forced to name accomplices, then burned while crowds gather to watch justice triumph over evil. But it is not justice. It is the systematic murder of female knowledge, the deliberate destruction of women's traditional roles, the final phase of a war that began in the early centuries of Christianity. The demographics tell the true story. 80% of those accused are women. Of these, the majority are widows, spinsters, midwives, healers, women who live independently, who possess knowledge, who refuse to disappear quietly into the background of male-dominated society. The accusations follow predictable patterns. A child falls ill after visiting the wise woman. A cow goes dry after its owner refuses to pay for healing herbs. A man's desire wanes after his wife learns about contraceptive plants. Cause and effect become twisted into malevolent intention. Natural misfortunes transform into supernatural malice. The randomness of life, disease, death, crop failure, natural disasters, requires explanation, and the witch provides a convenient target for humanity's eternal need to blame someone for suffering. But beneath the surface, hysteria lies a deeper, more calculated purpose. The witch hunts serve economic as well as theological goals. When a woman is convicted of witchcraft, her property reverts to the church or the local lord. Suddenly, the cottage where generations of healing women lived becomes available for new tenants. The herb garden that fed a family's medical practice can be turned to more profitable crops. The executioner's flame burns away more than flesh and bone. It consumes centuries of accumulated wisdom, oral traditions passed from woman to woman, knowledge that took generations to develop and moments to destroy. In the alpine villages of Switzerland, where the hunting begins earliest and burns hottest, entire generations of healing women disappear in the space of a decade. The young girls who might have learned their arts flee to cities or convents, abandoning their heritage for the safety of ignorance. The knowledge dies with its keepers. The songs that preserved herb lore fade into silence. The rituals that marked women's transitions, menarche, pregnancy, menopause, death, lose their feminine guardians and become the province of male priests who understand the body's mysteries only through the filter of sin and shame. But the witch hunters are not content with burning bodies. They must burn the very idea of female power, ensure that future generations never again imagine women as sources of wisdom rather than vessels of weakness. And so they invent not just the witch, but the mythology that surrounds her. The broomstick that carries her through the night sky, a mockery of the midwife's traditional mount, the birthing stool that women straddled during labor, the Sabbath where she worships Satan, a twisted reflection of the seasonal gatherings where women once celebrated the earth's cycles, the pact with the devil, a perversion of the sacred marriage between priestess and divine power that once legitimized female authority. Every detail of the witch myth distorts some aspect of women's traditional spiritual roles, transforming sacred into profane, holy into heretical, powerful into evil. The cauldron becomes a vessel for brewing poison instead of healing teas. The cat becomes a diabolic familiar instead of a practical companion for women who lived alone. The knowledge of herbs becomes traffic with demons instead of service to community health. The greatest irony lies in the accusation that wounds deepest, that witches serve the devil, the ultimate source of evil. For the women burning in these flames are guilty of serving the oldest powers humanity has ever known. The goddesses who ruled when the world was young, the divine feminine that Christianity has spent centuries trying to erase. They burn not as servants of Satan, but as the last representatives of a spiritual tradition that predates Christ by millennia. They die not for embracing evil, but for refusing to forget that women once stood closest to the divine, that female wisdom once guided communities through the darkest nights and deepest mysteries. The flames rise higher, the accusations multiply, the knowledge disappears into smoke and ash, and in the growing darkness, a new kind of woman emerges, one who has learned to fear her own power, to distrust her own wisdom, to believe that safety lies only in silence and submission. The witch is dead. Long live the witch. But she will return. She always returns. Because you cannot burn truth, only the women who speak it. You cannot destroy wisdom, only drive it underground. You cannot kill the sacred feminine, only force her to wear new faces, speak new languages, find new ways of lighting fires in the darkness. The hunters think they have won, but they have only taught her to hide better, to whisper more quietly, to pass her knowledge in code through lullabies and recipes, through folk tales and half-remembered dreams. The witch they invented to destroy the wise woman will become something far more dangerous, a symbol of resistance, a reminder of power stolen, a promise of knowledge that refuses to die. The fire burns, the wise woman screams, the witch is born from her ashes, and the story is far from over. The smoke never stops rising. Across the fractured landscape of Europe, from the Baltic shores to the Mediterranean coast, from the Atlantic islands to the Alpine peaks, pyres burn like beacons in a war that will rage for 3 centuries. The air tastes of ash and screaming, of flesh transformed into char, of knowledge dying one woman at a time. This is not random violence. This is orchestrated annihilation. In the German territories of the Holy Roman Empire, where political chaos provides perfect cover for spiritual cleansing, the killing reaches heights that will not be matched until the industrial slaughters of later centuries. Prince Bishop Gottfried Fuchs of Bamberg builds his reputation on the corpses of wise women, his jurisdiction becoming a charnel house disguised as a courtroom. 600 women burn in Bamberg alone. 600 lives reduced to smoke and memory. 600 repositories of healing knowledge transformed into ash that the wind scatters across fields that will grow nothing but silence. Watch how it unfolds. The pattern repeats with mechanical precision, refined through practice until murder becomes as routine as morning prayers. The denunciation comes first, a whispered word in the confessor's ear, a neighbor's grudge transformed into theological certainty, a property dispute elevated to cosmic significance. Old Katrina knows too much about herbs. Young Greta lives without a husband's protection. Widow Anna's cattle stay healthy while others sicken. Such knowledge, such independence, such success, such crimes. The arrest follows swiftly, usually at dawn when the mind is weakest and resistance lowest. Armed men surround the cottage, where generations of healing women have lived and died, their boots crushing herb gardens underfoot, their torches casting dancing shadows on walls that have heard countless women's secrets. She has no chance to run, no time to hide the things that will damn her. The dried plants hanging from her rafters become evidence of diabolic practice. The birthing stool in her corner becomes proof of unnatural knowledge. The copper pot where she brewed healing teas becomes a cauldron for Satan's work. They strip her naked in the cold morning air, searching her body for the devil's marks that prove her guilt. A mole becomes a witch's teat, where demons suckled, A scar from childhood becomes the signature of a diabolic pact. The calluses on her hands from decades of service become brands of supernatural power. The trial, when it comes, bears no resemblance to justice. She faces judges who have already decided her fate, learned men who quote scripture and law while ordering tortures that would make barbarians weep. The questions they ask have only one acceptable answer, and they will continue asking until she gives it to them. Do you confess to Congress with the devil? No, I swear by Christ's wounds, I know nothing of such things. The strappado lifts her by her arms, dislocating shoulders with sounds like breaking branches. Her screams echo off stone walls while clerks dip their pens and wait to record her confession. Do you confess to flying through the air to attend the Sabbath? No, please. I have never left my village, never harmed a soul. The Spanish boot closes around her leg, iron teeth grinding through flesh to bone. Blood pools on the chamber floor, while her tormentors discuss the theological implications of pain as a tool for revealing truth. Hours pass, days. The human body can endure impossible agony when survival hangs in the balance, but eventually, pain becomes more real than truth, more urgent than dignity. Yes, she whispers through lips cracked and bleeding. Yes, I flew on a broomstick. Yes, I attended the Sabbath. Yes, I made a pact with Satan. But confession is only the beginning. Now they want names, accomplices in her imaginary crimes, fellow witches in her non-existent coven. The torture continues until she gives them what they need. The identities of other women who possess dangerous knowledge, who live independently, who refuse to disappear quietly into the shadows. Her daughter, who learned herb lore at her knee. Her sister, who helps with difficult births. Her neighbor, who knows which plants prevent pregnancy. The village wise woman, who reads weather signs and finds lost objects. Each name she screams becomes a new warrant, a fresh target for the hunters who feed on female wisdom like parasites consuming their host. When they finally drag her to the stake, she is no longer the woman who once eased children's fevers and guided babies safely into the world. Torture has broken her body, isolation has shattered her mind, and the weight of false confessions has crushed her spirit until nothing remains but a shell that once housed knowledge, now lost forever. The crowd gathers to watch her burn, their faces hungry for the spectacle of righteousness triumphant over evil. Children perch on their fathers' shoulders for a better view. Merchants sell bread and ale to the spectators. Priests offer prayers for the witch's soul while lighting the kindling that will consume her flesh. But this is not entertainment. This is education. Every woman in that crowd receives the lesson written in flame and smoke. This is what happens to females who know too much, who heal too well, who refuse to limit their understanding to what men approve. This is the price of independence, of knowledge, of power exercised without male permission. The message burns as bright as the pyre itself. Remember your place, know your limits, trust only what the church allows you to trust. Forget everything else. The fire catches her skirts, climbs her body like a living thing hungry for the knowledge housed in her flesh. Her screams rise with the smoke, carrying the last words of wisdom that took generations to accumulate and moments to destroy. When the flames die and the crowd disperses, nothing remains but charred bones and ash scattered by wind that carries the smell of burned woman to the next village, the next target, the next wise woman who still believes she can practice her arts in safety. But safety is an illusion now. The hunters have tasted blood, felt the intoxicating power of transforming healers into heretics with nothing more than accusations and torture. They have discovered that destroying female knowledge brings them wealth, prestige, the gratitude of authorities who fear women's traditional roles. The killing spreads like plague across the continent. In France, the Parlement of Paris establishes special courts dedicated solely to witch trials, their dockets filled with women whose only crimes involve unauthorized healing, unsanctioned knowledge, inconvenient independence. The judges grow rich on confiscated property, while the executioners perfect their craft on female flesh. Margaret Barclay burns in Irvine, her crime the healing of a child when doctors failed. Alice Keitler flees Ireland one step ahead of flames that consume her servants instead. Joan of Arc dies not just for claiming divine visions, but for wearing men's clothing, commanding armies, refusing to submit to male authority in any form. But Joan is dangerous for another reason. She proves that female power, when it serves the right masters, can change the course of history. Her execution sends a message as important as any witch trial. Even when women's abilities benefit the state, they remain fundamentally suspect, temporarily useful, but ultimately disposable. The English Channel provides no protection from the contagion of misogyny. In England, the Witchcraft Acts of 1542 and 1563 formalize the hunting, while King James I publishes his Demonology to prove his scholarly credentials as a detector of female evil. The Pendle witches die in Lancashire, their extended family network of cunning women destroyed in a single trial that reads like a catalogue of traditional feminine knowledge. They could find lost objects, heal sick animals, ease the pains of childbirth, provide love charms for the lovelorn. All of it becomes evidence of diabolic alliance in courts, where knowledge itself is proof of guilt. Mother Waterhouse hangs at Chelmsford, the first woman executed under English witchcraft law. Her familiar spirit, she confesses under duress, takes the form of a white-spotted cat named Satan. In truth, she was probably a village healer who kept cats for the practical purpose of controlling rodents in her herb stores. But truth is irrelevant when fear drives the narrative. The Reformation provides fresh fuel for the fires. Protestant and Catholic territories compete to prove their theological purity by burning more witches than their rivals. The religious wars that tear Europe apart create perfect conditions for scapegoating. When armies destroy crops and plague follows in their wake, someone must be blamed for suffering that has purely human causes. The wise women die for humanity's failure to control the forces of nature. Their knowledge sacrificed to the illusion that female evil explains random tragedy. In Scotland, where Calvin's harsh theology takes particularly deep root, the hunting reaches peaks of savage intensity. John Knox's sermons against the monstrous regiment of women provide ideological justification for transforming every female healer into a servant of Satan. Agnes Waterhouse confesses to keeping devil cats and blighting crops. Bessie Dunlop claims she learned her healing arts from a fairy court that visits her in dreams. Isabel Gowdy describes flying to Sabbaths where she worships the devil and plots against her neighbor's prosperity. None of them understand that their confessions, extracted through torture and isolation, will be quoted centuries later as proof that Scottish women really did traffic with supernatural evil. The lies they tell to stop the pain become historical evidence, their false testimonies transformed into academic truth by scholars who never question why women under torture might say anything to make the agony end. The witch hunters develop their methods with scientific precision. They learn which tortures produce the most useful confessions, which questions generate the names they need to expand their investigations, which public spectacles most effectively terrorize female communities into submission. In Würzburg, Prince Bishop Julius Echter burns 900 people in a single decade, his territories emptied of healing women, midwives, herb wives, anyone who possessed the traditional knowledge that communities once treasured. In Bamberg, his rival Prince Bishop Gottfried Fuchs matches his brutality, creating a bureaucracy of murder that processes wise women like grain through a mill, reducing living knowledge to dead ash with industrial efficiency. But the numbers tell only part of the story. For every woman who burns, 10 others flee their traditional roles, abandoning herb gardens and birthing chambers for the safety of ignorance. Mothers stop teaching daughters the healing arts. Sisters refuse to share contraceptive secrets. Grandmothers take their knowledge to unmarked graves rather than pass it on to young women who might die for possessing it. The silence spreads like infection through female communities. Songs that once preserved medicinal lore fade from memory. Rituals that marked women's life transitions disappear into fear. The networks of mutual support that helped women survive childbirth, domestic violence, economic hardship dissolve under the constant threat of denunciation. Midwifery becomes suspect. Any woman who presides over birth and death, who knows the body's secrets, who can ease pain or prevent pregnancy, courts accusation. University-trained physicians, all male, seize the opportunity to monopolize medical practice, claiming that scientific knowledge can only safely reside in masculine hands. The wise women who survive learn to hide their abilities, practice their arts in secret, trust no one with the full extent of their knowledge. They develop elaborate codes for discussing herbs, disguise healing recipes as cooking instructions, embed contraceptive wisdom in innocent-seeming lullabies. But even coded knowledge proves dangerous when neighbors' suspicions can transform any success into evidence of supernatural aid. In remote villages where the hunting has not yet reached, old women sit by winter fires and whisper warnings to their granddaughters. Forget what you have learned, they say. Pretend you know nothing of herbs or healing. Keep your head down, your voice quiet, your wisdom hidden. But who will help when children fall sick? The girls ask. Who will ease difficult births? Who will know which plants heal and which harm? The old women's eyes fill with tears that taste of smoke and ashes. Better they die of natural causes, they whisper, than we die of unnatural accusations. The knowledge dies with them. Irreplaceable wisdom accumulated over centuries vanishes in the space of generations, leaving communities medically impoverished, spiritually diminished, dependent on male authorities who understand nothing of the female mysteries they have worked so hard to suppress. But resistance persists in hidden corners, secret gardens, whispered conversations between women who refuse to let the flame of knowledge die completely. They preserve what they can, adapt what they must, wait for times when it might be safe again to admit that women once knew things worth knowing. The hunters think they have won total victory, that female wisdom has been successfully transformed into female submission, that the threat of independent women has been permanently neutralized. They are wrong. Knowledge, like energy, cannot be destroyed, only transformed. The wisdom they burn at the stake goes underground, hides in fairy tales and folk songs, disguises itself as superstition and old wives' tales. It waits, patient as seeds in winter soil, for the spring that will inevitably come. The fires burn lower now. The great age of witch hunting passes into history, leaving behind empty cottages where healing women once lived, silent herb gardens where knowledge once grew, unmarked graves where wisdom lies buried beneath centuries of fear. But the witch survives. Changed, scarred, driven into shadow, but alive. She will return in new forms, speak new languages, find new ways to kindle the flames of female knowledge in the darkness that men have tried so hard to create. The silence is not permanent. The knowledge is not truly lost. And somewhere in the ashes of burned libraries and tortured women, the seeds of remembrance wait for their time to bloom again. The ashes settle, but the seeds remain. In the charred remains of cottage gardens and the rubble of destroyed temples, something stirs in the darkness, not the resurrection of the dead, but the persistence of the undying, knowledge that refuses to burn, wisdom that will not be silenced, power that finds new ways to flow when the old channels are blocked by fear and flame. The witch is supposed to be extinct, her secrets consumed by centuries of fire, her lineage severed by the systematic murder of wise women. But extinction is an illusion. Death is simply transformation, and the sacred feminine has always been a master of metamorphosis. She hides now, changes her face, speaks new languages, wears costumes that disguise her ancient power, but she never truly disappears. In the remote valleys of the Scottish Highlands, where the witch hunter's reach grew weak among mists and mountains, She becomes the bean feeser, the knowing woman who reads fortunes in tea leaves and finds lost cattle with dowsing rods. The Gaelic tongue protects her secrets, wrapping dangerous knowledge in words that sound like wind through heather to English ears. Old Morag sits by her peat fire on winter nights, her granddaughter at her feet, and tells stories that sound like fairy tales, but carry deeper truths. Of Selkies who shed their skins to walk on land, teaching young women that they need not be bound by single shapes, single roles, single definitions of what it means to be female. Of wise women who could speak with animals, preserving the memory of shamanic powers that once connected priestesses to the natural world. Just stories, she tells anyone who might be listening beyond the cottage walls. But her granddaughter understands the code, recognizes the kernels of botanical wisdom hidden in tales of magical herbs, the contraceptive knowledge disguised as recipes for love potions that repel rather than attract. The knowledge flows underground now, a hidden river that surfaces in unexpected places. In the hills of Appalachia, where Scots-Irish immigrants carry fragments of the old wisdom in their blood and bones, she becomes the granny woman who knows when babies will come and how to ease their passage into the world. Mountain women gather around her cabin when the moon is dark, learning which roots ease women's troubles, which teas prevent unwanted pregnancies, which songs call healing spirits to their aid. The Baptist preachers thunder against such practices from their wooden pulpits, but even their wives slip away on moonless nights to learn what the church refuses to teach, that women's bodies hold their own wisdom, that healing flows through female hands, that some knowledge can only be passed from woman to woman in whispers that sound like prayers. In the bayous of Louisiana, she dances with different spirits, speaks French and Creole, and languages that predate European conquest. Marie Laveau stands at the crossroads between African wisdom and European witchcraft, her altar crowned with Catholic saints who mask far older powers. She heals the sick with herbs that grow wild in swamplands, reads fortunes in cards and bones, performs rituals that blend ancestral memories with New World innovations. The authorities call her a curiosity, a colourful local character, not understanding that she represents something far more dangerous. The proof that spiritual power transcends race, religion, the boundaries that men use to divide and control. Women come to her from across the social spectrum. Wealthy Creole ladies whose corsets hide desperate secrets. Enslaved women whose bodies belong to masters, but whose souls remain stubbornly free. Immigrants fleeing European persecution, who recognize in her practices echoes of their own suppressed traditions. She teaches them all the same fundamental truth, that women possess power, have always possessed power, will always find ways to reclaim power, no matter how thoroughly it seems to have been stripped away. But the witch's greatest hiding place is not geography, it is literature. In the fairy tales that nursemaids tell to children across Europe, she preserves her knowledge in plain sight. The wicked stepmother who knows which apples bring sleep becomes a repository of botanical wisdom. The crone who lives in the woods and tests travelers' kindness maintains the memory of hermit healers who once served forest communities. The wise woman who helps the lost prince find his way home echoes countless real women who guided souls through darkness. The Brothers Grimm collect these stories across the German countryside, not understanding that they document the survival of an entire worldview. They sanitize the tales for Christian audiences, but cannot entirely scrub away the traces of older truths. The witch remains, transformed but recognizable, carrying fragments of genuine wisdom wrapped in the protective clothing of make-believe. Children learn her secrets without knowing they are secrets, absorb her knowledge without recognizing it as knowledge. The fairy tales plant seeds in young minds, the understanding that women can be powerful, that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources, that the forest holds mysteries deeper than church doctrine. The Romantic poets sense her presence and write her back into literature with deliberate intent. Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Christabel conjures lesbian vampires who challenge Victorian sexual propriety. Percy Shelley's wife Mary creates Frankenstein's monster, usurping the divine prerogative of creation and placing it in human hands. John Keats writes of La Belle Dame sans merci, the beautiful woman who lures knights to their doom, and liberation. These are not just Gothic fantasies, they are acts of literary necromancy, raising the witch from her literary grave and giving her new forms in which to trouble the conscience of patriarchal society. But the most dangerous resurrection comes from an unexpected source: academic scholarship. In the libraries of German universities, where professors dissect dead languages and analyze ancient texts, a different kind of magic stirs. Jacob Grimm, when he is not collecting fairy tales, compiles his Deutsche Mythology, documenting the pagan beliefs that Christianity tried so hard to erase. He writes of Berchtha and Frau Holle, of wise women who could control weather and heal the sick, of goddess figures who once commanded respect rather than terror. His work reads like objective scholarship, but it performs the miracle of resurrection. By treating the old beliefs as worthy of academic study rather than religious condemnation, he gives them back their dignity, their power, their dangerous possibility. Other scholars follow his lead. Max Müller analyzes the solar mythology that underlies European folklore. James Fraser compiles The Golden Bough, documenting magical practices from around the world and suggesting that they represent universal human truths rather than diabolic deceptions. Each book, each article, each academic paper becomes a spell of unbinding, loosening the chains that centuries of persecution wrapped around female spiritual power. The witches read these books. Oh yes, they have survived. These daughters and granddaughters of wise women, these carriers of fragmented knowledge who have waited centuries for permission to remember. They gather in Paris salons and London drawing rooms, in American parlors and German philosophical societies, drawn together by hunger for the wisdom their grandmothers died to preserve. Helena Blavatsky stands before audiences across America and Europe, her Russian accent thick with authority, as she speaks of ancient wisdom traditions that Christianity tried to bury. She claims her knowledge comes from mysterious Tibetan masters, but those who listen carefully hear echoes of older European traditions, of priestesses who could travel between worlds, of wise women who understood the hidden connections between matter and spirit. The Theosophical Society she founds becomes a gathering place for spiritual seekers who reject the limited roles that conventional religion offers women. Her followers include suffragettes and artists, scientists and mystics, women who understand that political liberation must be accompanied by spiritual reclamation. In England, Margaret Murray sits in her study at University College London, surrounded by books that most people consider dusty, archaeological relics. But she reads them with different eyes, sees patterns that escape her male colleagues, recognizes in the witch trial records evidence of something her profession refuses to acknowledge. Her theory, when she finally publishes it, explodes across academic circles like a bomb. The witch trials, she argues, were not the persecution of delusional women, but the systematic destruction of an organized pagan religion that had survived underground for centuries. The Sabbaths described in trial records were not diabolic fantasies, but real gatherings of practitioners who maintained pre-Christian traditions. Her scholarship is flawed, her evidence selective, her conclusions sometimes fantastical, but she accomplishes something more important than academic accuracy. She gives the witches back their dignity. Instead of mad victims or evil sorceresses, they become members of an ancient religion, practitioners of a faith that predated Christianity and persisted despite centuries of persecution. The idea spreads like wildfire through communities hungry for spiritual alternatives to patriarchal Christianity. If the witches were not evil but simply practitioners of the old religion, then perhaps their knowledge was not corrupted but pure, not dangerous but necessary, not destroyed but merely hidden. Gerald Gardner reads Murray's work in his retirement on the Isle of Man, and something stirs in his blood, half memory, half imagination, half desperate hunger for meaning, in a world that has lost its connection to mystery. He claims to have been initiated into a surviving coven of traditional witches, But whether his stories are true matters less than what they accomplish. He gives the scattered remnants of the old knowledge a name: Wicca. He provides rituals that honor the goddess alongside the god, ceremonies that celebrate the female body instead of condemning it, practices that welcome women as equals instead of subordinates. His first book, Witchcraft Today, appears in 1954 like a match struck in darkness. It declares that the witch is not dead, not evil, not defeated. She has simply been waiting for the world to grow wise enough to welcome her return. The response is immediate and electric. Letters pour in from around the world, from women who have carried fragments of the old knowledge in their families, from men who recognize that patriarchal spirituality has left them spiritually starved, from seekers who understand that something essential has been missing from Western religious life. Covens form in secret gardens and suburban living rooms, in university dormitories and country cottages. They read poetry by candlelight, dance beneath the full moon, learn to see divinity in female form again. They study herbalism and astrology, practice healing arts and fertility magic, reclaim the knowledge that their ancestors died to preserve. Some of what they practice comes from genuine tradition, fragments of folk wisdom preserved in families, botanical knowledge maintained by herb women, seasonal celebrations that never entirely disappeared from rural communities. Some comes from imagination, from books, from the desperate human need to believe that the sacred feminine has not been permanently silenced. It does not matter. Truth and myth weave together like herbs in a healing tea, each ingredient strengthening the whole. What matters is that women are gathering again, learning again, remembering again what it feels like to see themselves as sources of wisdom rather than vessels of sin. The feminist movement of the 1960s discovers the witch and claims her as sister. She becomes a symbol of resistance, of power reclaimed, of knowledge that refuses to stay buried. The slogan spreads across protest signs and consciousness-raising circles. We are the daughters of the witches you couldn't burn. Each woman who speaks those words performs an act of resurrection, calling the wise women back from their graves, honoring the knowledge that survived fire and fear, claiming kinship with power that predates every institution that has tried to contain it. The witch shops open in cities around the world, small stores filled with candles and crystals, herbs and oils, books that teach forgotten arts. They serve as gathering places for women who understand that spirituality need not require submission, that wisdom flows through female channels, that the sacred feminine has always been waiting for the world to remember her true name. In universities, women's studies programs examine the witch trials with fresh eyes, seeing in them not the triumph of justice over evil, but the systematic oppression of female knowledge. Historians document the economic motives behind the persecution, the legal frameworks that made murder possible, the long-term cultural damage inflicted by centuries of gender-based violence. The scholarship gives academic legitimacy to what practitioners have always known, that the witch hunts were never about religion, but about power, never about protecting society, but about controlling women, never about truth, but about fear of female autonomy. Each book, each article, each dissertation becomes an act of remembrance, a spell of restoration, a contribution to the great work of bringing the witch back from the dead. But the most powerful resurrection happens not in covens or universities, but in the quiet moments when women learn to trust their own intuition again, to value their own knowledge, to believe that they might possess wisdom worth preserving and sharing. In the kitchen garden, where a young mother teaches her daughter which herbs ease menstrual pain. In the birthing room, where midwives reclaim their ancient role as guardians of the threshold between life and death. In the circle of friends who gather monthly to celebrate the moon's cycles and their own. Each act of female wisdom, shared and honored, undoes a little of the damage inflicted by centuries of persecution. Each woman who refuses to be silenced, diminished, or ignored performs a small miracle of resistance. The witch survives because she must survive, because the world needs what she represents. The understanding that wisdom comes in many forms, that power can be gentle as well as fierce, that the divine speaks through female voices as clearly as through male ones. She has learned patience through centuries of hiding. She has learned cunning through generations of persecution. She has learned strength through the knowledge that she carries something precious, something necessary, something that the world cannot afford to lose. The fires have died down. The hunters have turned to other prey. The danger has not passed, but has diminished enough for tentative steps from the shadows, careful words spoken aloud, hidden knowledge shared with those who prove themselves worthy of trust. The witch returns not as she was. That innocent time of temple priestesses and village healers is gone forever, but as she must be, scarred by history, strengthened by survival, carrying the accumulated wisdom of women who refuse to let the flame die completely. She rises from the ashes, transformed but recognizable, changed but unbroken, ready to teach the world what it tried so hard to forget, that female power is not evil, but essential, not dangerous, but necessary, not something to be feared, but something to be celebrated. The sacred feminine stirs in her ancient sleep, opens eyes that have seen the worst humanity can do and survived it all, prepares to speak truths that the world is finally, perhaps, ready to hear again.